What is your method to find out that this idea of concept of the self applies to the machine? And the whole, what does the whole language about language we use normally related to humans, in which way does it relate really to machines?
Yes, well, of course, it's in a way, it's when we talk about these machines, when we try to understand what they do, we use language that we use among us. You know, we talk about seeing. The robot sees the red ball. And now, it's not the same way of seeing. So but there is a functional equivalence. So it's like an airplane, you know, is flying. We say the airplane flies. Of course, it doesn't fly like a bird. It doesn't flap with wings and things like that. So but the principles, underlying principles are similar, and the function is the same. That's why we use the same terminology. And so in the case of the self, you know, it's actually extraordinarily complicated and dynamic, because there is no little cell or something, no simple explanation for it. You know, the self is, you have the body, you have the persona that you create, and all these kinds of things. And the body is then also the sensory experience, is the control, proprioception, you know, all these kinds of things together. And so this is the big message, actually. It may look simple what we do, but if you start probing, then it turns out to be extraordinarily complex. So it's a bit like in biology, you know, when they started in biology to realize that we were dealing with chemical systems and with very complex molecules in the beginning. Giulia knows this better, you know, the biologists didn't want to believe it, because they said, it cannot be, that's such a complex thing, you know. But the more they are probing, the complexity of biology is just incredible. And it's in a similar thing, the complexity of language, for example. We have at least 500,000 grammatical constructions in our head. We are dealing with millions of concepts, millions of facts. You know, and in AI today, we build systems that also contain millions of facts and have all these grammatical constructions and things like that. So it's a good tool to handle the complexity, which is a defining characteristic of our mind.
And why did not your form of AI being developed now, let's say, in the world of social media, but this kind of pattern recognition you started to analyze?
Well, there are many reasons for it, but the main one is, if there's always a gap or a lag, if you want, of 10 to 20 years between invention or creation of new ideas and their use. So what we now see, like deep learning, for example, are things which are basically dating from the 80s. And so now they are possible with more computing power, more data, things like that. So now, you know, it explodes. But these basic ideas, they were already there 20 years ago, 25 years ago. So the things that I'm talking about, this is for within 25 years. And I'm convinced that in the future AI, within 20 years, let's say, will be dynamic, evolutionary, embodied, you know, all of these things. Because otherwise, it's dangerous not to do that. Because those systems do not have meaning. So they are dangerous.
Hito, in her talk, was basically analyzing the relationship between AI and, or one aspect of her talk was about the relationship between AI and society, in which it is transforming society. And my question to Hito would be, could you imagine that there are not the same shadows or other shadows to this kind of interpretation of AI?
No, I mean, I was very charmed to hear you talking about robots which have no purpose, right? I mean, they just play. And it's very hard to understand me if you're sitting. I also had a hard time understanding you, but I really liked when you said these robots, they don't have any purpose except they have free time. And I think that's exactly the contrary of what is happening. You know, robots in society have anything but free time. So they are always there for a purpose, and the purpose is usually efficiency and maximization of profit, period, or making things more cheaper. That's usually the purpose. So of course, I mean, you know, my idea has been for quite a while that I find it extremely fascinating, you know, all the experiments with machine learning or artificial life simulations and whatnot, but you have to basically quarantine them in a gallery, period, for the next 100 years or so, until people or robots have figured out what actually is the case, you know, what happens, what this is all about, what meaning is, or other questions. I'm sure there is, you know, millions of questions which could be explored in this time. But the thing that happens is that this is tested, as they say, in the wild, meaning the purpose is established while already implementing it in reality, within reality, and then, you know, with the implementation, the further optimization and so on of these processes is explored, and that's what happens. So I think there are two different kinds, and for me, you know, I cannot answer the question what a machine is, what machine learning is, what artificial intelligence is. I think no one can, but it's very obvious what these things are doing already. And even, as I said, in their very low-tech forms. And I'm particularly, worried does not even capture it, terrorized to imagine what happens in this precise political situation with the rise of all these authoritarian movements and leaders, what is going to happen with AI, but also automation, right? Just to give you an example, one of the things that happens now with Brexit, of course, is that many of the big warehouses and so on that were relying on cheap Eastern European laborers, they are not going to hire, of course, British laborers now. They are going to use more robots. So robots and automation will help isolationism, will help the creation of borders within the next decade or so. And I don't even want to go into, you know, how machine learning could facilitate those developments.
The question is also, when you started your experiments in the 90s, we were still in another world. At the moment, evidently, this kind of artificial intelligence based on pattern recognition is transforming our world to an extent that, for example, concepts such as information, communication, and that was also meant in the video of Hito, are being transformed, even up to the point where one can question, will be the concept of the self in 20 years when one applies your kind of concept of learning and AI, would that be the same than today? Or are the technologies at the moment so interruptive that they really transform our basic notions of self, communication, information?
Well, there are two things that I want to say about this. One is that, you see, AI itself, I mean, the people who do AI are very practical. I mean, they just have a problem, like recognizing the sound of whether a glass is breaking or not. Or there's a painting machine, you know, and then if there's a bubble of air in the paint, then it doesn't work properly, and things like that. So really problems, concrete problems, and how to deal with them. And so most of the work in AI is very far removed from all those considerations. Now, having said that, it is true that if AI starts to be used, and particularly, I would say, misused in certain areas, and I think an example which I wanted to communicate is in social media. You know, how people are being manipulated, actually.
Perhaps you can say a few words about that, in which way AI is manipulating today.
Well, it's of course, it's implicitly manipulating, but basically well, let's make it very concrete. So you're in YouTube, and you're watching a clip, so you search for the clip, you see the clip, but on the side you see also other clips. And so, because what YouTube wants is for you to stay in YouTube. The same thing with Instagram, you know, and so on. And so the owners of the platforms, they want to that you stay within their platform. And so they have machine learning that is basically trying to determine what is the best ranking to present to you so that you would click on it. And so, of course, there are millions, I don't know, maybe billions by now, you know, clips on YouTube. Well, a lot in any case. So this is an enormous problem, right? To have a good list so that you would click. And so this is an example where machine learning is being used to try and predict what is the best. Now, the way this is done is not by caring about you, but by basically keeping statistics on people who looked at this clip, typically also looked at that clip. And now what happens is that the people have a tendency, well, this is our weakness. You know, if there is an outrageous thing, they say, oh, really? You know, you look at the clip and then you see Hillary Clinton has a ring of pedophiles in the basement of a pizza restaurant. Say, really? Hillary Clinton? I didn't think that. And you click on it. Okay? But this is sort of, this is used by this machine learning algorithm to say, oh, people are clicking on this. You know, that's an interesting thing to put. So the ranking goes up. And as a consequence, you get all these effects like outrageous things which are fake, pop up.
So basically what you are saying is that the AI is working on the shadow of our characters.
Well, it's exploiting our weaknesses.
Yes.
Now, it's not that the AI people have been thinking, how we are going to exploit people's weaknesses, you know? It just is a side effect. Nobody thought about it before. It was launched, and then you see polarization, you see a rise of racism, you see all these negative effects. And so this is an example where the technology is having an impact on society, for example, also by anonymity and things like that, so that people are saying things which they would otherwise not say.
Hito wants to intervene here.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, it's not AI as such that wants to do such things, right? You're talking about YouTube. It's YouTube that's programming the algorithm, and that's keeping it secret, and that's programming in a way to be most useful and profitable to them. So in that sense, I think the technology could do all sorts of different things, right? The technology doesn't have any sort of internal desire to do A or B. It's getting used by corporations, it's getting used by people. So in that sense, I think it would be important not only to ask what language, what alphabet, but whose language, no? Not who has the means of production, but who has the means of translation nowadays. I think that's really important, because AI as such doesn't want anything. It's a bunch of statistics, right?
Well, some of AI, yes.
Maybe also you could also focus on the responsibility, because when you say YouTube wants to stay, that you are on it, it's that there is a advertising industry that buys the spaces from YouTube. So when we buy a product and this product has bought advertising on YouTube, we are also, in a certain way, financing this whole system. So I think it would be also interesting in this moment to look at advertising as one of the most interesting points where decisions are taken and where money is fueled and where a kind of network would be, but it would be important to read how this system works to understand who is financing this part of research.
That was also something, just very briefly, something I was thinking in relation to what you said, that basically truth claims of language are being undermined now by these fake news and so on, but advertisement has done this for a very long time now, and everyone thinks it's perfectly fine. But I think this is just like radicalized advertisement that's going on now, and that starts, in fact, really to undermine the foundations of societies, but it has precedents already, it has a long tradition.
What for me is a bit scary, but AI is invisible. We cannot see it. We can see a robot, but we know there is, but we cannot see it. And then, going back to Asimov, when Asimov wrote Io Robot, I Robot, he puts rules in these robots. So the question is, which kind of rules we are putting AI, of which kind we should put to have a kind of preservation of our living system.
Well, I should say that there's a lot of attention now going to this topic. And so there's actions from governments, but also the at the European level, also from researchers themselves, thinking about what are the rules, what can you do and what can you not do. Because what we see is that often something is developed in, naively, you could say, in good, not, and then you suddenly see that it's used for creating fake news. And so it's not the AI, let's say, these techniques that they are neutral with respect to the usage. But then you see that usage is being made, It's the same with, for genetic engineering or for, physics, for making arms. And so you can use AI for making weapons, but it's to the people and to the society that has to create the constraints on what is the proper use of these things.
Nevertheless, my question, since you are interested in, let's say, almost philosophical, also in the concept of communication, information, and so on. So my question would be, to which extent, when you describe these processes of the AI interfering in our society, in our minds even, do you also, what are the consequences for the people in this relationship?
Well, I think what we need to do is to understand these effects, because they happened a bit unexpectedly, maybe for some people not unexpectedly, but in general, we have to understand them and then counteract them. So it's like with all technologies, we have to learn how to deal with it, that we don't become victims of this technology. But
can you give examples of counteractions to the situation we are in?
Well, they're very simple things, like in computer vision. So there are face recognition algorithms. So maybe you don't want to be recognized everywhere, right? Yeah. You want your privacy. Yeah. Well, for example, you can, a countermeasure is that you have a certain glasses, with certain colors on it. And if you use those glasses, then those algorithms don't work anymore. Yeah. So this is sort of a guerrilla
Yeah,
AI.
do you have some more examples of guerrilla AI?
Well, I think also in terms of your profile, you know, how you change your profile,
Yes.
or what profile you create,
Yes.
or whether you want to create a profile at all, because the real, you know, you have to become aware that these things are going on by American companies mostly, and so then you can defend yourself. So we have to have a citizen defense against these kinds of developments which are now rolling over us, but we have to counteract.